goes right, we are going to watch home movies in my childhood.
Yes.
That's all for the rest of the year. Because I was pre-camera, so it's just like a flip book. So I just get like a guy. Be really cool. You're gonna enjoy it immensely.
I would cry.
It's little, just in the corner, so we're all gonna have to crowd around. And so the test will be tomorrow. No, tomorrow. You can take it too. We already know what test you're taking. And so I got most of the tests graded. I just have to finish up a few things. A couple people have tickets, so my plan is to give you tomorrow. But people are doing well. I'm pleased with it. Nice job. In fact, it's so good we should do a test every day, right? Yay, test.
Would they be on like a random topic?
Well, yeah, whatever pops into my head at that moment.
All right.
And what else we have to do? Anything? So let's go take your notes out. Let's go Manifest Destiny, because on Tuesday my plan is to watch a movie called The Cause. About the cause of the Civil War. And so that's next Tuesday. So I want to make sure we're at that spot to do it. So let's take your notes out. All independence, very good. Where do we have? Columbia. Yes. 41. I can't remember the number. That's asking so much of me.
Whichever one goes
Chapter
from
13.
53 to...
Yeah. So originally I had the pages up 553 to 581. I decided for Thursday, but I think I'm going to decide the rest of it and just do a 10 or 12 question matching quiz. Sound good? Just a matching quiz.
On Monday or on
Let's go on Monday. So the whole chapter on Monday. Sound good?
for chapter 13.
13. You can do 16 too.
Does this
And 29.
Does this new section have like a specific like title?
What are we calling this? Oh, Manifest Destiny. But this is Manifest Destiny, but the overall title, let me get the overall title, I almost forgot. Today, for the next few days, Manifest Destiny. This is the road to the Civil War. We are going Manifest Destiny, slavery, and the fiery victims. The events that led to the Civil War. This is it. And the Industrial Revolution, the party system, and all these things kind of rolled up together, but in the expansion to the War for Texas independence. No. Like my sound effects? Manifest Destiny. And Westward We Go became one of the most famous sayings of that era, so much so that this is the painting, Westward We Go. And Manifest Destiny, if we don't know, means, are we recording? We are recording! Yay!
It needs a recording.
Oh, I almost forgot to show you something. Look what I found. My high balance pinky ball. You impressed? You impressed? So we have to take a bite tomorrow too, right? We got to do it tomorrow. Everyone's ready.
I'm listening to this.
Oh, this is the best one. BSBHEK 9375. That's by far the best one. We all know that.
Read it again.
No. Have it memorized. But I don't want to show off. Okay. So, Manifest Destiny means expansion westward, making this a continental nation. When I say continental, I mean literally stretching across the continent. Not the whole continent, but from sea to sea. And there are a few, Canada is a continental nation. Mexico is. Well, in fact, much of Central America is, the continent is much more narrow down there, but these are continental nations. And this, don't forget, Jefferson had his back porch facing west, this obsession with west and the obsession with land. And there are three main reasons they tie together. The first one is this very nationalistic idea of spreading American civilization. But whatever that means, because American civilization is this hodgepodge of different groups and identities that came into form the United States, also areas of the United States would conquer and absorb. And there's nothing really, there's not one like language or ethnic group, or something that defines what is an American, a citizen of the United States. So much of that therefore became this concept, a vague idea of what American civilization is. And the reason I say it's vague is because we probably get 350 million different answers for what American civilization is today, let alone back then. But remember that idea that you love your country. You love your people because it's your people. What is that called? Nationalism. And this is very much nationalistic. Remember, patriotism is loving your country for what it stands for. Nationalism, loving your country because it is yours, my country. And most people, when they say patriotism today, what they really mean is nationalism. It's just that they kind of shorthanded term patriotism and the nationalism. But the spreading American civilization, so whatever it meant to be American, move that westward. And the thing is, this is the border of the United States when this begins, the 1830s, after the War of 1812. It's kind of much faster here, wave of immigration. This is Mexico. That is territory claimed by then basically two countries and the people who live there, the U.S. and Britain. So that's where the U.S. stopped. The idea is we're going to spread it here. And one important thing to know about this, we're going to have Americans, citizens of the United States, leave the borders of the U.S. and go into different countries. But they take America, their concept of what an American is with them. They bring the flag with them. So when they go into Oregon, they're still Americans, citizens of the U.S. Or into California, which is Mexico. Or in Texas, which is Mexico. They still are citizens of the U.S. It's got big repercussions to, let me throw a country out here, Mexico, down the road. But here is, therefore, westward we go, what that meant of American civilization. You've seen this painting. It's a great painting. It's in the textbook. And that's either Lady Liberty, or most of the time they would call her Lady Columbia then. And you notice, what is she carrying? It's a what? Actually, the Constitution. But it can also be implied as the Bible, but the American civilization and a telegraph wire. Spreading civilization. So here is the light of the East, where you have the United States, civilized into the darkness of the uncivilized West. But it's bringing the light. You know, she is the light of civilization. What's that mean? The U.S. And we're moving into these darker areas where you have, see who's fleeing? You see it? It's kind of hard to see in the shadows. American Indians here. You know, it's the bison on the plains, the uncivilized fleeing. And what's following? The first settlers coming in to take that land, and then a little bit more technologically advanced. You catch that? It's a very, very nationalistic, very manifest destiny. It's our destiny to conquer this land. Yeah. Either Lady Liberty, or most of them they would have called her just Columbia. And you know, there was talk of making the United States naming it Columbia. Seems really weird now, but that's but that would be a symbol for the U.S. well into the 20th century. In World War I, it would compete with another symbol, Uncle Sam. And in World War I, kind of Uncle Sam would take over. And Columbia would still be around, but not used near as much. And next reason, we talked about this before, trade. We have the fur trade, which I already mentioned with the Cork discovery, the unbelievably good, it's hard to get that word out today, unbelievably good harbors on the West Coast, and the trade with China is just literally exploding. What war have just been fought to force China to open up to equal exploitation? Yes. Yeah. The first of the two opium wars, where Britain found a way to get the Chinese addicted to a drug. And China was in the middle of a civil war anyway. It's the same one caused by the famine that led to the Irish immigration. The famine hit China too. It was worldwide famine. And so open up trade. And lastly, land. The whole thing started with land. Remember, the French and Indian War started by people like George Washington wanting land. These are speculators. But more and more, this idea of the American dream came about. This is a relatively new concept by the 1840s. And what was the American dream? That Jeffersonian idea of becoming, remember that term yeoman? An independent farmer. I own my land. I am free. And this would be the goal of people working in factories or people who would make it rich to go get that little piece of land, just like people who also become multimillionaires go buy hunks of Montana and fence it off and make their own little piece of land. This would be the American dream up until the 1930s. The Great Depression was just below that. Actually, the 20s when the farm economy began to collapse. The farm depression began before the Great Depression. Yeah.
So it's just like becoming an independent farmer.
Yeah, owning that little piece of land. Now, most people couldn't do that, but that was the dream. And so you see a different American dream coming in after World War II. You own a house, maybe a few of the appliances, a car, being able to afford to have your kids go to college or something like that. And I think we're right in the middle of transition with that too. So, but also remember diffusion. Diffusion was originally Jefferson's idea to spread slavery out to eventually go away. Well, that's going to change to spread slavery out to get more slave states, to protect slavery. And so one of the things about Manifest Destiny, it's going to be portrayed a lot of Americans, and this is what it was taught to me when I was in school, it's just this great desire to settle this untamed wilderness. Well, it was tamed. There were people who lived there, so we're going to conquer it from them. But also, so much of it had to do with slavery. To get more slave states, which part of Congress has equal number of members per state? The Senate. So you have equal senators. So even if the population of free states is greater, the Senate can always stop anti-slavery measures. And so it's so much about, make sure we get this down, slavery. And so the first citizens of the United States to move into the West in any, large numbers is kind of a, large numbers as in a few thousand. Because this is mostly areas that once this area was still controlled by the various tribes, and almost impossible to get there. Technology will change that, obviously. Or the mountain men. Now, they were sometimes trappers, but most of the time they were traders. They would go in and trade with various tribes. Remember I talked about economic imperialism and the fur trade in Western Massachusetts under the King Philip's War? Remember way back when in King Philip's War? We have a similar dynamic here. And the carriage trade was what they were trying to get into that market. What's carriage trade? What wealthy people in Britain and New York City wore when they rode around in their carriages. And what is it? This hat. By the way, this is one of the most famous mountain men, Joe Meek. He would eventually become a member of, live in Oregon and become elected to their state government. He kind of did the whole gamut from mountain man to the new state. What's this hat made of? Huh? Yeah, beaver pelt. Strip off the hard, thick layer. You have a felt on the bottom that's really warm, and that would be for hats. And that's what the wealthy wore, their warm hats when they rode around in their carriages. Beaver felt hats. And so they're going to trade they're going to trade most of the tribes for beaver. And lay it out, strip off the top, and you have this black thing, and that would be turned into a hat. And there would be pop-up forts. It's another whole story. It does have a lot to do with Montana, including the most famous of all the fur trading forts, where mountain men and various tribes would go and trade, mostly for beaver pelt, at Fort Union. And so we're talking about this area right here. Fort Union is right at the confluence of the Missouri and the Yellowstone. And if you ever get a chance, it's literally on the border of North Dakota and Montana. It's a cool place. That's what it looks like. Well, this is about 5 years ago. But it was whitewashed, so you can see it for miles. Fur trading fort, it's really, they really did a great job. There's a cavalry fort called Fort Buford, 10 miles away. And Fort Union would be one of the most famous forts. It would pop up and explode by the early 1840s and then immediately fall apart. Why? The carriage trade changed. They no longer wanted beaver felt hats. They wanted something else. Remember I told you how China trade was exploding? What did they want their hats made of? Think China. Silk. Silk hats. That saved the beaver. There'd be no beaver left, probably. They would have killed them all. So silk hats, that China trade exploding. And literally, the age of the mountain man, whatever you might think of that, just done. 1840. It's amazing how fast the traders, boom, gone. I'm not saying there wouldn't still be trade. I should add, it's no coincidence that once the carriage trade switched to silk hats, to many citizens of the United States, they look at the same way colonial Massachusetts looked at the people who lived here in 1670. If we're not trading them for beaver, why are they there on our land? When the fur trade died, justification for all that. I'm not saying the fur trade 100% died, but it was done. Fort Union would basically be disused by the 1650s or 1850s. If you get a chance, go there. The other thing that's also very surreal, those hammerhead oil drills are literally like all on the hill over here. They're just all over there. That's how close it is. I should have took a picture of it to give you an idea, but I didn't want them in the picture. And so, this would also be at the time where we have massive immigration west. And don't forget, these are settlers. They're moving into land, taking land, and kicking the people who live there off. And there are about 250,000 immigrants. That's a lot. And the big trigger, though, you have the end of the carriage trade, or the carriage trade would change, but don't forget that panic. That economic disaster was so stressful. It was such a shock to the system that a lot of people said, we got to get the heck out of this scary economy here. Maybe we should leave the country and get the heck out. And so that would trigger this. And I've heard all these stories about the Oregon Trail. There's elements still there. But in reality, there's not that many immigrants going west because it's such a difficult and very expensive trip. The people who went west had to have money. I mean, who ever played that Oregon Trail game, the little video game? Yeah, you have to have money, and what's going to get you? Everyone dies of dysentery, right? Which actually, yeah, dysentery is a real problem. Don't get dysentery. Write that down. Yeah, that's my public health warning for today. Why are these two big spikes here? What happened? Good guess. Very good guess. But that's something to do with finances. Yes. Gold in California. Yeah. And so there really weren't that many because it was really expensive. And soon this will be dubbed the United States expanding its empire upon the trails. So the U.S. empire would be built upon settlers going across the various trails. And the most important trail would be the Oregon Trail right here, up into Oregon Territory, which was still not part of the United States. A lot would branch off into the California Trail and go to Mexico. California is part of Mexico. Or the Santa Fe Trail into Mexico. The Spanish Trail, that was a hell on earth trail here. Very, very difficult trail. But no one really lived in LA. I'll tell you why people lived in LA. Yeah.
Is this referring to just westward?
Yeah, just westward. And a lot of people would start west and realize this is crazy and go back. And a lot would die along the way. If you had a little bit of wealth, you didn't do that. You went around, all the way around South America. It's a lot faster going by boat at that time, especially. And so with that, I love that term, empire upon the trails. It really does fit. This is an American empire now. Yeah, you have a question?
I was just curious. Banks kind of explode. I think like everybody would almost
Well, sure, banks might loan money, but when the panic hit, banks were afraid to loan money. The banks that survived, they're like, oh, I don't trust anybody that they'll be able to pay me back. They literally have a name for it. It's called a credit freeze. And that happened in 2009. After the, in your lifetime, you had to go through a credit freeze. Aren't you excited? It was awful. It was a nightmare. And so people might be able to borrow money, but it was really hard to borrow money. So you probably had to have a little bit of wealth. But this actually made things worse because a lot of people then would sell everything and were going west. But if everybody's selling all their stuff at the same time, what happens to the price of regular begins to go down? Happens in every panic. Yeah, if you want to scoop up fine art, wait till a panic. Of course, you have to have money and all that. Okay, moving on. This is actually the 1880s, but it's still a good shot. Even though you don't want to use oxen for wagons, they don't really like the yoke. The yoke has a bad habit of choking them, which is bad for oxen morale. And so, this is going to become memorialized. Remember that Hudson River School? You need to write the name. I just did it to remind me. But that Hudson River School of Art about the Transcendentalists, and they always looked west. So here's the Oregon Trail, and I love this painting of going into the setting sun. And that's a cool picture. But is that like Wyoming? No. Have you been to Laramie? But this very idealized vision. And once again, we're going to make our civilization, make it into the light. We will make it. But it's also to get away from the east. This is actually the different. You notice the one about westward we go, bringing civilization here. Here, we're getting away from it. Back to nature. And with that, quick. And so here is the Oregon Trail. I'll mention the Mormon Trail in just 6. We've got to talk a little bit about that. And started in Independence, which is near present-day Kansas City, Missouri. And the great part about Kansas City, Missouri is just across the river is Kansas City, Kansas. It's like, oh, we can't think of any name. Let's just go with that. So you have a town of Kansas City, Missouri, about 600,000, and a town of Kansas City, Kansas, about 400,000. It's very weird. And as you can see from this beautiful valley, and there are a few spots, you got to get going by March, but it might still be too cold. And if everything works exactly right, you could get to the coast. You could get here by November. And if you're late at all, it's over. Because if anyone has ever driven across beautiful southern Idaho, there's literally nothing there. There's no water. And it's already dry enough here. But these locations, like you have to be at Chimney Rock or Scotts Bluff or Independence Rock by a certain time. And a lot of this trail is still there because it's so dry. When it does rain, it washes the wagon ruts even more, so it's remained. And so some of you might have seen parts of it. It's really cool. But Chimney Rock, that's Chimney Rock. I don't know how they got that name. It must have just been some kind of weird fluke. It used to be about 2 times taller. It broke in, I think, 1975 or something. And I've been there many times, and this is one of those things I always say, there's certain words that people cannot pronounce. My dad, who grew up in Nebraska, but he cannot say the word chimney. He says chimney. Yeah, no idea why. You say chimney. It's just funny, those words that, there's a few that I can't pronounce. Well, I'm not going to do it because then you'll keep saying, hey, say that word. A good friend of mine used to teach over there, so that he moved, but he couldn't say rural. It is kind of hard. He could not say, he couldn't even come close. And he'd say countrified, which I thought was great. But they would just say rural, Mr. Knifer. Like, shut up. All right, so maybe that's why I laughed. No. This is more common with mules, much better to pull wagons. These console wagons, you couldn't really haul much. You can't ride in them. You put a little bit of gear, maybe sleep in them, but they have no shocks. There's a story about they would get virtually seasick if they rode in them. I know, going at like 2 miles an hour and getting seasick. That should tell you a lot. And so basically what they're saying is you're walking to Oregon. I want you to think about that for a second. How difficult that would be. And how tough they had to be. I mean, they were of a different generation, different species, a different breed. I mean, that's my generation. We're going to walk to Oregon, and I just said, show me the way. But it's different now, you know, kids these days. And it would be families going together, and just, I'm trying to imagine just all ages, and we're just going to walk to Oregon. Every night they would lager the wagons, which meant they would circle them up for defense, but there were very few attacks. Most of the time, the various tribes were like, what the heck are these people? Just leave. Well, the problem is eventually they would stay. And Independence Rock is one of the great places in Wyoming. If you get a chance, go there. And on the rock, they carved their names and when they went through. You see that one, 1850? Sometimes with axle grease, and it's still there. And I love that. It's just so great. You just know that they know the hardest part of the trip's coming, and they're so proud they made it. And they just want people to know, I did this. Look at what I did. You know, just that's, I really like that. I want to acknowledge that. I guess is my point here. And here's that you still see the wagon ruts, and I'm still trying to figure out getting over this mountain. I can't even imagine over these hills. Most of the time you want to go on mountain ridges. You make roads on ridges, but sometimes you have to go over. By the way, I think you probably can guess why on ridges. So if it rains, the rain goes away, and not. If you do it in a valley, all the rain goes in, and your road becomes, well, a river. But it's a lot harder on a ridge, isn't it? Because you got to go up to it. Yeah.
So when they're on the chain,
there's a story of that, and you see some pictures of that, but it didn't work very well. Especially because the prevailing wind is coming from the west. But I've seen pictures of people trying that, and that's more just, I think, just a stunt. I guess if you're going the other way, you could do it. I see people do it in like the Salt Flats west of Salt Lake City. And they would do races and things like that, but it was more just because that's really flat. You want to take a good hike? Go on, hike that. You have a question? And speaking of that, let's get to the Church of Latter-day Saints, because they made this trip westward on the Oregon Trail. And I said I would come back to them, and the reason why is because they're going to have such a big impact on the West. I think it's important to get a little bit of history. I'm not going to go into great detail, just a few little things. But this is going to be a religion that's going to come out of this burnt-over district of New York. And it really must have been something in New York. Just this turbulent change of all these different religions and ideas, and some becoming mainstream churches and some disappearing, some become cult. Almost all would be persecuted. And don't forget the reason why. All this change here with the new economy, you can imagine it rippling here. They could see it coming and the insecurities that brought. And so up there on top, that's Joseph Smith. And this is going to be filled with a lot of myth, not only by his followers, but also by people who were his enemies. So it's really hard to know the actual fact. You see a lot of this, like there would be a persecution of a group, and so you have people trying to defend and people attack, and so sometimes it's hard to get to, so I'm not going to go into much detail, except I found a book of, he was a treasure hunter in upstate New York. He and his, well, this is unclear, he said he found it alone, his 15 other friends said, no, we found it together, but a book of golden plates that he would translate into the Book of Mormon. This is a copy, and I'm not sure this one because it's from 1830. So I thought that was pretty cool. And in it was a New Testament of the Christian Bible. I'm simplifying it a lot there. But the big thing about this is that it had definite elements of Protestant Christianity, but there was a big difference, especially early on. And the big differences would be really taken by people who would persecute them and say, oh, you're not Christian. And it's much more complex than that. But you can see the beginnings of this persecution. Now, he would eventually, late 1820s, this would become public after he got married and moved to a different part of New York. And a couple big things about this church. This was not alone. This was very much like other churches. In fact, right nearby was a man by the name of Matthias who started out this Church of Matthias. Right next to him. So I'm always wondering, God, did they talk? It's really fascinating to me how much this was going on in one area of the United States. It shows you what the Industrial Revolution did. It also makes me wonder, you know, if there's any place like that today. I know what you're all thinking, Jordan, Montana, right? This hotbed of different ideas and a bubbling cauldron of culture. Okay, moving on. There's this idea that it's called restorationism, or the restoration of the original church, of the apostles, of the Christian church of the apostles. We're going back therefore and what they thought the church was at about 70 to 110 CE. And so, with that, yes?
What were the two said or something? The original church.
Yeah, we go back to the original church of the apostles, as they saw it. The big thing is to go back for the Council of Nicaea, when the Roman became a Christian nation and they set up the rules for the Christian church at a place called the Council of Nicaea. I know what you're all thinking. When are you going to mention the Council of Nicaea? You finally got your chance. Anyone know what the Council of Nicaea is? It's right about here. And the Roman Empire basically set the rules out for the church that would still exist for the most part as the Catholic Church. That this concept that God and the Son of God are essentially the same. That is Trinity that came out of the Council of Nicaea. And there's a group called the Arianists that said, no, the Son of God and God are different. God, you know, it's different. Which is, it wasn't a huge difference, except for the people who really believed it. It became a massive difference. So it really depends on your source of belief. But they want to go back to that time before where they were as there was a separation. And that's why I put down the nature of God. It's the God and Son of the God, and the Son of God are the same. And the original Mormons, no, they're not the same. And this, they're heretics. And it's amazing how fast it happened. But I gotta stress, this was a group called the Arians, with a Y. Don't think it's Arians as some of you might be thinking. It's with an I, not a Y. They believed that there was separation, and they were pretty much driven out of the church. They pop up like in 800 in southern France. They're going back to that, which is kind of fascinating to me. I wonder how, must be pretty well read and put this together. It's impressive to me. And they're also millennialists. They believe that Judgment Day is coming. Now, at first they were pre-millennialists, say, hey, it's going to happen. Like, remember the Millerites? Oh, that was your bonus question, wasn't it? What did the Millerites do? They went on the roof and what? And who looked like a salamander? John Quincy Adams. Yeah, well, separate. They're both gods, but separate. I'm simplifying a lot, but there's a separate. They're like separate entities. And instead of one entity. This is Arians. It's actually really interesting how you have these different points of view of something that is essentially very much the same, unless it isn't. But they thought Judgment Day was coming. And they also thought, if it's coming, we're going to create our own, they actually said literally a Zion, which meant this move to this beautiful valley. I didn't have to look. I just knew when I could see your faces, like, hee hee. And a theodemocracy means a religious democracy. And who are the members of, oh gosh, they took some of the tumbleweeds away. Just a mound of tumbleweeds. It didn't get quite as windy yesterday. A democracy, but the members are members of the church. And from New York, he basically, Smith had to flee to Ohio and then to Missouri. In fact, the reason they fled to Missouri is that those who thought that he was essentially a heretic, this is him being tarred and feathered in Ohio. So he was tortured in Ohio. They fled to Missouri, ran out of Missouri, and they went to Nauvoo, Illinois. And Nauvoo, Illinois, Oh, I thought I had this, but Zion. This was going to be their Zion. And, or homeland for their faith. So, for example, there's another group that was just about ready to start this. Jews were doing this, and they were called Zionists. And they took over much of city government. They weren't, it's arguable whether the majority of the city or not, but this faith is very evangelical. It is very good at bringing members in. And so he did have a lot of followers, even though they had, they were pretty poor. His newspaper would become, in many ways, the voice of the church in the city. And to people who were not members, they saw this as, well, heck, they would break windows, they would attack it. The thought was that this was taking over their town, and maybe their city, and maybe their state. Now, after what happened in Missouri and Ohio, there was creation of a private militia. That's a picture, that's Smith leading this. He had a uniform made, but this makes it seem almost too martial, too military-like, but I don't know. I don't know there. But, and then talked casual about maybe as my numbers grow, I could run for president. And this was in the newspaper, his newspaper, and that's going to lead to just almost chaos. But the big thing was this. In 1841, he came public about the concept of, he called it spiritual wifery, but it's plural marriage. And eventually he would have, you can see all kinds of different numbers. This is the approximately, by the way, I learned how to do this number now. You hit the Alt and 247. That's how you get this. I found that out. I've seen 30. The actual number is not important for this concept, but this was seen as a direct attack, therefore, on what it meant to be American. Once again, that's open to argument. And he would be arrested, agree to be arrested. A mob from parts of the city and elsewhere would storm the prison, and he would be lynched. The prison was, I knew where it was in this picture, right here. And he'd be lynched. Lynched means tortured to death. Actually, he was beaten, fought back, tried to climb out a window. He was grabbed. There was a tussle match where he was kind of roughed up, and somebody murdered, shot. And this, you can imagine, will lead to absolute panic. And what's going to happen with this church is going to change over the years, just like every church religion did. But here they are, and it's like, we got to get the heck out. And so they more and more begin to move to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and began their trip westward. And thus, where did they go? Utah. Why did one of Smith's followers, Brigham Young, go to Utah? By the way, I love this painting or picture. So photography was brand new. And here's a picture of Smith. And this is old school cut and paste. You've heard the term cut and paste? Where they literally cut out a picture, pasted it on another picture, and then they would take another photograph of that. So you would have like, it looked like a picture, kind of. And they would try to blur the edges. So these are two separate photos put together of Smith and Brigham Young. And I also noticed two important things. First off, if you weren't sure, this is an old photo. This is old. This is not new. This is old. So somebody wrote that on there. And secondly, you see how the smudge mark? They would try to paint the faces of these black and white photos to make them look more lifelike. And so you see these old pictures, and they got like these pink smudges on them that make them just look more ghost-like and creepy. But that's why you get to that kind of blur here, because the paint began to smear out. So that's a great photograph. But AP led the first group in 1846 along the Mormon Trail, which would follow very close to the Oregon Trail. And I know there's a relative of my wife, who went to Denmark. They joined for a while and then they left. But he came from Denmark, came here and walked on this trail, pushing everything he had in a wheelbarrow along that. And all I could think of was the determination of them, and also how bad their lives must have been. But they arrived in the Great Salt Lake. Why Salt Lake? It's out of the U.S. They got the heck out of the United States and left. They went to Mexico. And it's in a basin. And the thought was, who else is gonna come and settle there and take it? They can take it because it's relatively dry and there's a logic to it. And one more thing, it's relatively close to the coast. So they had to learn very quickly how to irrigate. It's pretty amazing how fast they did. But Young would send people to a mission right here near the mission called Los Angeles. There's nothing here, it's dry as bone. And they are ready in case they have to leave. There was talk, we have to go to Samoa. Samoa had just been kind of confident that we're going there. Get the heck away. And why is this important? Well, they took the irrigation practice they learned here south of the Great Salt Lake, and they brought it here to the San Fernando Valley and found an aquifer. That aquifer, all of a sudden now you can irrigate this valley, or San Francisco, or sorry, Los Angeles, and settlers came. That's how come Los Angeles is going to become the city it would be. Is because they were worried and needed a safety valve to get the heck out. I find that fascinating how all that comes together. Now they're gone. They're in the Great Salt Lake. I should add that Brigham Young himself stepped out the streets of Salt Lake City. There's the trail, very much along the Oregon Trail. And if you ever go to Salt Lake City, it is, I think, the easiest big city I've ever been in to get around, by far. It's a nice grid. I mean, it is laid out perfect. It was planned. Because most cities are just piled on top of each other. Heck, even Helena is hard to get around. I always hate coming to school and have to go through the downtown and there's somebody ahead of me from a different state. I thought, oh God, they're going to forgot the one way. Nobody lost. I'll get behind them. Always seem to be. Well, it's pretty amazing how easy it is, at least in the original part of Salt Lake City. And so we'll come back because we got to get to the big issue here. Slavery in the territory. Because this is what it comes back to. And yes, we will come back to what happened here in Zion. All that means is a homeland for your religion. Well, slavery in the territories. Look how slavery is right here, 1790. The more red, the more slaves as a percentage of the population. 1830 spreading out, right? Look by 1860. The number of slaves. And slavery in the territories will be the issue that will lead to civil war. Does everyone got that? That's civil war. Because the federal government controls territories. And you might notice something. There's slavery in a lot of territories that you might not think of by 1860. Nebraska Territory, where your city was open to slavery. You were sitting in an area that was a slave holding territory. And the anti-slavery Mormons here would open their territory up to slavery in 1850. And there would be slaves there. And so there's going to be radically different areas. There's going to be New Mexico, not here, but all through here. We will come back to that crisis down the road. And so, what personifies this whole thing? We talk about settlers, we talk about movement west. I told you a couple stories, but Texas was key. And Texas was actually part of Mexico in 1821. They won their independence. Father Hidalgo, that's a great Diego Rivera painting of Mexican heroes. Here's the great Father Hidalgo, be one of the leaders of fighting for independence from Spain. The problem Mexico has is it's huge. It goes from the Yucatan all the way up to here. It's massive. There's a huge desert between Mexico City and all this area here. And they don't have a lot of Mexican citizens here. And so they're desperate for more people, especially here. We have this very aggressive, land-hungry country coming. So they want people. And so, as soon as Mexico became a republic, they tried to encourage immigration into Tejas. Tejas is the term, the eastern part of what is now Texas, for that province of Mexico. Therefore, the people who lived there were Tejanos. They were Mexican citizens. Where do we find people? Oh, Americans. citizens of the United States are hungry for land. Let's bring them in. Now, we know that we might not be able to control them. And so they must swear an oath to become a Mexican citizen and to become Catholic. And we'll bring them in, thinking we'll get people who are not Comanche to move in here and we can control this land. This is one of these moves by a country, Mexico, where if you could tell them, oh no, you're making a horrific mistake. You will suffer for this mistake. You could tell them, you have the ability to see the future. This might change everything, but nope, they made this stupid move. And who comes pouring in? Oh, almost forgot. So, the Comanches, or this fearsome tribe, not very big, they're nomadic, so they can't be very big, that lived right here, and they took the horse like nobody else. They took those small ponies and would ride the plains, and they didn't get horse at the end of the 16th century. And by the 1800s, they were the most fierce light cavalry in the world. There's stories of, these are Comanche in the 1880s. Comanche warriors, okay, this shows them with, they might have a rope here, but for the most part, no stirrup. Could ride at full gallop using the horse as a shield, so shooting, bending down, shooting arrows under the neck, and hitting a target at 50 yards. If a little spot in the tree, they can nail it. Now, riding a horse, at least for me personally, with stirrups and a saddle, and even a slow gallop, is very scary. I can't imagine doing it at full gallop while trying to shoot an arrow. I would shoot the horse or shoot me, then fall off. Let me rephrase that, I just fall off. But they were just, they controlled the plains, and them and their Kiowa allies were incredibly powerful. So, let's bring in Americans. The most famous would be Stephen Austin. And what city is going to be named after him? Dallas, yeah. And so, Austin, yes. He would die just when the Mexican the War for Independence began. He would bring a number of settlers. This is one of the families, this is actually from the 1850s, but they came. This area right here, the good bottom land right here. They came in. They swore the oath, whatever. Austin was a failed lawyer and trying to make a new start. In fact, a lot of people are going to make a new start in Texas. That became part of their reputation. Make a new start in Texas. And soon, the citizens of the United States, kind of an English, Americanized version of Tejas, became Texans. I don't know why they added an X, but why not? But soon following Stephen F. Austin were all of these squatters. Remember what a squatter is? They just came and sat on the land without the legal claim from the government of Mexico. They didn't swear the oath to the Mexican government, and they didn't convert. They just came in, took the land. And what did they bring with them? This bottom land is perfect for cotton. They brought in slaves. And so soon, the system of slavery and slave codes was there, and they kept that term Americans. So I put this picture in there. Here's a slave trade. Coming through, this is supposed to be bringing slaves, forcing slaves into their chaining. They have a fiddler, so they keep step. And you notice the flag? Going into Texas. Tomorrow, the Alamo. And, you want to be gone tomorrow? We're good? Okay. Thank you. See you tomorrow. We'll see you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow. I gotta find the frisbee. I set it down somewhere. Oh, hold your right here.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
That's exactly what I said.
I'll be in at lunch to take this.
I'm pretty sure that.
No.
No?
Just come in real quick. You have to take it too. Chapter 9. See you tomorrow. Well played. Talk. Got a knuckleball. Wow, and you gifted. Well played. You were fine yesterday.
Yeah, you want me to do this today?
Yeah. I'm picking you out then.
Okay.
Go here. And I agree with you, your comment on that. Well played.
Texans.
Dude!
It's like there's drama. Yeah.
Play-Doh!
And weird sound.
And weird what?
I don't know what it is. It's like warm.
It's what?
It's warm. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't trust anything that's just warm on its own.
Like it was.
It sounds like a human body or something.
It just like takes it. It holds heat. It does hold heat. It's a no make piece of stuff. More long.
I'm kind of scared now.
I know. You should be.
It's-
Not a good thing.
That's one of those things all of a sudden it's just going to start bubbling over. It's the Blob. That's a good 50s horror movie. The Blob. You know what it's about?
The blob.
Yeah.
What color is the blob?
What color? It's red. Kind of that.
That's a mix of red and blue.
Oh my.
It's coming back.
Okay. So on the edge of your paper, number 125.
What's up with Jaden? So
No, he wasn't born old. Because the third wall, the wall, and the wall back and forth. Then he just started watching this. And it's just so cool.
Well, it was just a study. What do you have?
Dude, that is losing like my first class I was like 75 and turned into 12.
Are you ready?
Second one, really, I just told my fourth grade class I was 60 on and she was 95. She allows corrections and then she weighs it on a scale.
You're trained.
I will always.
And just feel after the correction. Yeah. So really there was 65 on the class and she gave me. I remember.
So much.
I saw the interesting article about the cheapest food, like one page on five. So, Valley.
Dude, I dropped it.
No.
Guys, I just thought of the best idea. So you know, like, when you go to the, you guys think how it is when you get papers, like on stalls when you go to the bathroom or whatever.
Because you have to stop.
Yeah.
What?
Like, so imagine having one of those, so they call it toilet paper. Because like the newspaper is the toilet. Why did it? I was reading
I read that every time I go in.
And when it had one that was called the toilet paper. But it's really choppy boys, like that's my favorite words.
I brought a focus to this today.
Are you? I'm wearing t-shirts right now. I was kind of picture.
Hey, how we doing? It's good to see almost all of you. The test, the essay's graded. Don't have the multiple choice, but I won't take long. On the chair, first try. Thanks for the applause, you. I really appreciate it. That was this. I mean, that's when I know it's sincere. I don't like to brag, but
No, 30 minutes.
speaking of not bragging, we got to change the schedule just a little bit because I never think about